It's time to spotlight equity capital markets. Joining us now is Samuel Kerr, the global head of equity capital markets at Merger Market. Samuel, thank you for being with us today. You know, equity capital markets are at their most bullish that we've seen in years in the wake of this IPO wave that we've had in 2025. What do you think is the driver behind this massive uptick we're seeing?
Thanks so much for having me. No, I think it's been a fascinating year. It's been a real one of huge demand for IPOs, one where issuance has really come back after a very volatile period at the beginning of the year around April when President Trump's Liberation Day tariff really did shock equity markets. The recovery since then has been stupendous. I think a lot of that has to do with sort of the quite a secular trend really that we've seen really from the start of the year about people looking for diversification into new asset classes, particularly surrounding the mega trends of sort of crypto and AI. And it's interesting to note, I think, that this IPO wave we've seen in 2025 really kicked off with the earlier year IPOs of CoreWeave and Circle, playing very much into those cryptocurrency and AI mega trends that people are so keen to get exposure to. And I think that's really what's been driving a lot of the activity. And since then, other issuers have ridden that wave.
Yeah, and we've certainly seen that this crypto / AI, they seem to be the two that we're doing all the time. Little bit of some buy now, pay now, and some collaborative platforms sprinkled in there. But as far as the major ones that we've seen, are there any IPOs that really stand out to you as being particularly well done or particularly successful, or even the converse of that?
Absolutely. I think, one of the really interesting things to note so far in 2025 has been alongside a real, increased wave of issuances we've seen. And as you said at the top of the segment, this is the best quarter and year to date we've seen in the IPO market since 2021. One thing we have noticed alongside that has been increased investor discernment around these deals. So an IPO, for example, like Circle, where you had phenomenal financials alongside a mega trend, or even FIGR, where you had probably some of the best numbers we've seen in a public markets debutante for a very long time, has attracted huge amounts of demand from the institutional investor universe. Stories where there is a little bit more sort of susceptibility or questions potentially around the long-term future of that company, say, for example, the recent listing of StubHub, or even say something like Klarna, you've definitely seen a little bit more fragility in the underlying market towards those stories. So it does feel like there is a real quality bar still with the IPO market, despite the fact that lots of companies have been able to come to market to price and trade up in the levels that we saw, for example, FIGR, Circle, or CoreWeave. You do really have to be telling a compelling equity story, either through your financials or being part of a mega trend.
And primarily, Samuel, when we're talking about this IPO recovery that we're seeing, I'm talking domestically here in America, but this is not just a domestic story. This is a global story. This growth goes beyond the borders of the USA.
Certainly does. I mean, Europe has been a real problem IPO market for a long time. I mean, I'm based in London, and the debates over the future of the London Stock Exchange are a national pastime here. So you're right, absolutely. In London, we're starting to see a bit of an IPO window open up at the moment. There's two live IPOs in the market in the form of Shawbrook and Princes Group. You had an IPO in London that priced last week, Beauty Tech Group. You have an IPO pricing today in Stockholm, beginning to trade tomorrow in the form of Verisure, which is a massive IPO for Europe, the security systems business, multi-billion euro listing. So yes, we are seeing momentum across the board. And what we are really seeing is, as I said to the forum about diversification of capital flow, international investors seeking interesting opportunities in multiple markets where they can get exposure which they didn't have before.
And as far as, we've talked about Europe and EMEA, strengthening year on year, but Asia Pacific also really entering this conversation. I was taking a look at some of the numbers that you sent over, and they're having a revival in terms of their equity capital markets as well.
Absolutely. The main story for APAC this year has been the rejuvenation of Hong Kong, Hong Kong's IPO and new listing market. What we've seen particularly in Hong Kong, which has been a really interesting phenomenon, is a lot of domestic listed companies in China, in Shanghai and Shenzhen, going to the Hong Kong Stock Exchange for a secondary listing, the sort of A to H listing wave that we've seen so much of. And that, for me, I think is something that we're going to continue to see. It's a trend that I think we will, see through right to the end of the year. year and through to 2026. But there is also good news in other markets. India remains a strong market. Japan has really come back. So year to date, Asia is doing very well. I mean, one of the things you said about it being a global recovery, this is the first time in many years where every region that we cover, every major world region, is up year to date. So it is a truly, universal recovery of equity capital markets. But obviously we are starting to see a bit of tension now in the fourth quarter. The US shutdown being a big thing that could certainly slow IPOs in the United States. So I think the question is always going to be whether this momentum can continue.
And, as people are looking to get into this momentum and be a part of it and be more diversified and get into these newer companies and into these IPOs and get in early, how important is it to take a look at also the investment banks? Because they're really, the facilitators behind many of these.
I mean, it's a phenomenally good year for banks when IPOs are back, right? I mean, it's a high fee paying business. So the fact the investment banks are working, to get more of these deals across the line I mean, the advice from investment banks to clients at the moment is take any window you can. So it does feel like banks are really pushing their clients to take a window where it's possible. We saw in April around the Liberation Day tariffs how quickly market momentum can turn. So the advice from banks does certainly seem to be to their clients, take a window where you can, otherwise you may lose that window. And I think investors, issuers, and banks are now, sort of coming up to the fact that these conditions can change very quickly. Good times don't always last forever in equity capital markets, and I think a sense of urgency, as we've seen this year, is probably a good thing going forward.
And Samuel, last question, as far as ECM transactions, is there one particular type that is showing a trend of being better received or more successful? IPO, private placement, secondary offering.
It's a very interesting question, actually. And yes, you're right. I mean, certainly it does feel, even though the IPO market has come back in a very strong manner, those secondary placements of already listed companies and very large listed stocks are certainly incredibly attractive. What we've seen in equity capital markets in general this year is equity capital markets are seen by funds across the globe as a true alpha generating opportunity. Benchmark indices are trading at or close to record highs and have been throughout the year. That is putting a little bit of sort of maybe doubt into some people's minds over the long-term, direction of those valuations and whether they can achieve true alpha by buying just into the listed market. If you can buy a follow-on transaction at a discount, obviously a small discount at an overnight deal, or you can get into a really good IPO that then trades up, that is a real alpha generating opportunity for funds across the globe. So we are seeing more participation in equity capital markets across the board. And so I think IPOs, follow-ons, whatever, you are still going to see more demand across the investor universe for those transactions.
Well, Samuel, we appreciate you taking the time to join us today to talk equity capital markets. I think you're nearing the end of your day, too, in London. So I hope you have a great rest of your day. That's Samuel Kerr from Merger Market.